good day to wherever you are in the rest of the world. I know that we have at least 7 time zones represented. So truly a global reach for today's Yokosuka Council on Asia Pacific Studies Maritime Hour. For those of you who are first time to this series, this is the YCAPS series where we seek to tackle advanced topics dealing with maritime security and adjacent maritime areas. We always bring in 1 or 2 top-notch scholars, but we hope to have or speakers and other experts. But we try to also have an engaged community conversation. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce our speaker and our topic from the day, but please feel free to jump right into the chat. Things that you hear that you agree with, disagree with, other points you want to bring up, put them right there. And then when we get into the Q&A discussion, we'll be able to springboard directly off of those points into a conversation. Tonight's Maritime Hour features Mr. Samir Madani. He's the co-founder of tankertrackers.org. To be very frank, we've been looking forward to having him on board this call for some time because the work they do is just of the most interesting work in the sort of open source maritime domain awareness field out there. But earlier this year, when the Pablo caught fire off the coast of Malaysia, a dark ship that was engaged in illicit activities without proper registration. People died and the fire went out, and then the ship just sort of remains there, a hazard to navigation and a hazard to the environment. That really brought to highlight the importance of this topic, and it used it as an excuse to sort of move this up to the top of the stack of our Maritime Hour topics. So you didn't come here to hear me, and we only have an hour. So I'm going to turn it over to Samir to give us some opening thoughts before we have the conversation. Samir, over to you.
John, thank you so much for that introduction. My name is Samir Madani. My friends also call me Sam. I am the co-founder of tankertrackers.com Incorporated. We are a US-based company that specializes in the tracking of oil. Although we are geographically not in the US, we are operating from Europe. I'm based in Sweden. I have another colleague also in Sweden, and I have another one in the UK. So we're 3 co-founders, and we work with the photographers as well to help us attain visual evidence for the vessels that we track. So I can explain a little bit about our background and also what we're working on and the clients that we cater to, the type of clients we cater to. So on the background front, we began as a hobby in 2016, I would say, when we started tracking oil for the purpose of just helping mom and pop investors with some fundamental insights into the flow of oil. And so we started tracking the imports by Houston, from like the Middle East and so on. And we just wanted to get a better understanding of what's really going on. And we were using a website, which we still use. It's marinetraffic.com, very good website for tracking vessels at large. And we've kind of like mastered our use of that and squeeze out every possible feature we can from that in order to improve our tracking. But in addition to that, we also started tracking with the help of satellite imagery. And that was something quite a novel concept at the time, at least for us. And in 2017, we had built up enough of a base on social media, because we started off as a Twitter community and then worked it up from there. And then by 2018, we had incorporated the company as a company. So I went full time with this after 20 years in telecom and consumer electronics, and decided I got kind of fed up with like working on developing technology. Instead, I wanted to apply technology to some use. And I thought because I'm very much into geopolitics and following that, and then markets. I really love following markets of all kinds, macroeconomic aspects, and then things like commodities and so on. And so fused it all together, and we had launched the company, 5 years ago, and we're now all full-time since a few years back. And this is no longer a hobby, but a overworked job. So we're working overtime, and we work basically whenever clients need us to. And clients can reach out to us at very odd hours and days, so weekends included. But it's fun. We love doing this job, and what we do is we cater mostly now to institutional clients. So up until this year or sometime, we were mostly catering to the retail side of things. But then what we noticed that there was a lot of institutional clients asking for additional content and capabilities, and at the same time, we had institutional clients who were just using the retail logins for their corporate use, which wasn't really fair. So we decided to shut down retail and focus everything on institutional. And of course, because we are bootstrapped, we don't have any investors or anything, we managed to build this company organically, and we are self-sufficient. So we have no need to raise capital or anything like that. Business is going very well, especially around the turn of a year. You notice that. And so what we do is we cater to several client category types, I would say. The biggest one would be the maritime insurers. So these are the big houses in the industry that want to know if their members or clients are violating any specific contractual clauses regarding, for instance, sanctions or anything like that. So when we began with satellite imagery back in 2016-17, we had already understood like how to use that in combination with AIS. But then what happened was that when sanctions were placed on places like Iran and Venezuela, we started noticing a difference in behavior. So you would see vessels that would switch off their transponders, but then you start seeing vessels which don't really appear to be where they say they are. So like on AIS, they could be showing that they are in the Gulf of Oman, but in actuality, they're somewhere near Iran. So that's the kind of thing that we would notice. And this became sort of an unintended specialty for us. We weren't really looking at this initially. We're just looking at just tracking oil at large without really specializing in anything. But when you're just a company of 3 people versus an industry where the employee base is around 50 to 500 per company, then you have to figure out how you're going to compete in that space. So we decided to specialize in the dark fleet tracking very early on, and that was around 2019, 2020. And what we noticed is the amount of vessels that switch off their transponders is far less now than it was back 3-4 years ago. Now it's all about spoofing. So basically manipulating their positions to show that they're in B instead of A. And so, yeah, maritime insurers are the big clients. Then we have the commodity traders, like the large houses which move oil, and they want to know which vessels to avoid because that could get them into trouble. Then there are shippers alike. There are oil giants as well, which is incredible. We started off with like as a hobby, this was a nighttime thing, and now all of a sudden we're catering to the largest names across different sectors. And then there are also Western government institutions that we work with as well. So all in all, we're doing well on all fronts. And what we do is we track the dark fleet, which is around 600, slightly over, I think it's around 611 or 612 active tankers right now out of a total of 650, 660. So a lot of them went to scrapping, and for instance in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, and so they've gotten rid of them because they're way too old, like over 2 decades, and they were initially intended to be scrapped, but somebody maybe paid $1 million or $2 extra to throw it back into rotation. So this is the kind of vessel profile that you normally discover when you're tracking a dark fleet, is that the vessels are very old, they're antiquated, and they should have been scrapped maybe 5 or 10 years ago, even in some cases, because we have tanker which is like north of 35 years, which is still moving oil. And so in the case of Pablo, that was also a very old tanker. It blew up. It had run something like over 20 times, 20 different voyages of Iranian oil. And we believe that when the vessel was empty and waiting in Riau Archipelago, that it was going to rendezvous with a larger VLCC supertanker in order to receive Iranian oil, because that transaction never happened as a result of the explosion. But what we noticed was that a larger empty vessel appeared only days later to receive that oil, which is not the usual profile. Normally, you'd have 3 Aframax tankers, which can carry 700,000 barrels each, and they'll meet up with a VLCC, which can handle 2 to 2.1 million barrels. What we do on a daily basis is to visually track these tankers. Now, of the 600, 600 is a big number, but you can't track 600. So you're on constantly maybe around, I would say around 50 to 100, no, probably around 70, 80 tankers a day on average, I would say, that we are adding into our database so that we can display everything on the map. And the map is around 15 days old on a rolling basis. So you can see around 350 plus tankers that are moving around in the world. And it completely contradicts what's shown on AIS. So on AIS, you'll see like a huge flotilla of tankers off the coast of Cabinda, Angola, which is northern Angola. And those are the vessels that come around South Africa from the Indian Ocean, and they'll go to Cabinda, and at least look like that, but in reality they are in Venezuela, where we are photographing them from shore. And so we get a daily stream of photos coming in, and we're able to show our clients that the vessels are there, when in fact their client is telling them that the vessel is in Angola, for instance. So the photographs will show the names of the vessels in many cases, but not in all. And instead, we have enough visual details which can be compared against public ledgers, such as public databases such as marine traffic. And we collect both shoreside and satellite imagery. So all in all, we have around 45,000 photos from shore and space of tankers at large, and of the dark fleet combined, it's around 30,000 photos. So it's quite a lot. We're tagging and photographing everything we can, because at some point, some of these tankers, the good ones, are going to break bad, and that's what happens. So on average, we're looking at maybe like once a week a tanker joins the dark fleet, and it had a clean record before that. It may have been just moving Saudi oil all the time back and forth. And then, the tanker got too old. A broker sold it, found a new buyer, and then that buyer throws it into this kind of rotation. So within a year, a tanker like that would maybe move around up to $1 billion worth of oil in current market value. And that, of course, goes into the coffers of governments, which might not have good intentions for the population. So did not distribute that wealth, for instance. So that is what we specialize in. We have a data portal for all this information, and we output the information via, of course, by a web login, but we also have APIs for different things. So one API would be, for instance, the export data itself, like how much oil was transported from country A to country B, aboard what vessel, and what quantity, and what grade of oil, etc. And then another API would be, for instance, just the shoreside gallery. So like all the photos that we take from shore, the 15,000. And there's so many more APIs. I think all in all, we have around 5 APIs or so, which clients are able to stream in, and they do so all the time. So API is the best way to deliver such data. And we're working on more things. We also have, hang on, I got motor mouth disease. We also have what we call an STS gallery, and it's basically satellite photos of all the ship-to-ship transfers, and it's over 940 sightings we've made. I think more than half of that is just this year alone, and around 250 plus or so are in the Riau archipelago, which is northeast of Singapore in Malaysia, just south of the South China Sea. And those transfers are, for the most part, Iranian oil, and they will take place with AIS spoofing involved, and also they do not inform the relevant authorities like Malaysian Coast Guard that they are conducting these transfers. So they'll drop anchor. That's one violation. You can't drop anchor without permission, and then you can't conduct these transfers. And on top of that, they, for the most part, they are unassisted. So there are no tugboats coming in with a boom line and encircling the transfer in case of an oil spill. So we'll see things like oil spills in these waters. And these waters, you know, this is a pristine archipelago comprised of many islands, and there's a tourist attractions, and the oil will spill on those beaches and also on the mainland. And so I saw a pretty big oil spill just the other day, in fact, and that was crude. Normally you see things like light products like diesel and so on, but this time I saw crude or heavy fuel oil. I'm not sure because we couldn't see which vessel it came from. It was in the transit area. These are also the reasons why dark fleet needs to be tracked. It's because of environmental reasons. So it's not all about just sanctions. Then there's actually cases where there's theft involved, and that's where governments also turn to us for assistance with. So you get a lot of oil that's actually stolen from certain countries. So we help out with that. We also do what we call forensic investigation reports, or FIRs, for clients who commission us to do that, and it's usually delivered. Normally it's around 3 to 5 days job. You get like a 20-30 page PDF packed with imagery and AIS data and a contextual narrative. And then you have cases where we have to do things overnight, like an express job, and that happens more than often, I would say. Especially when there's an ongoing situation and the client has to contact their counterparty and kick off the discussion. And normally, not most, but a lot of the cases that we work on go into litigation, and so there's lawyers involved and so on. So we have to be very, very diligent about what we investigate and what goes into a report. We can't afford any slip-ups anywhere, really. So we do a very thorough job, and everyone is back, checking all the sources that we include, and then for the most part, all I hear about is that the clients are very happy and that they win the case. So going forth, we are still on the path of building up our base of visual evidence gathering. So we do that with shoreside photography. And then we staff up a little bit on the tracking side of things so that we can cover more territories and more precision. I would rather focus on more precision than more territories. And also we avoid things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, because we want to focus on actual intelligence and for our clients, what they call actionable intelligence. So they want to have, basically a bulletproof case when they go out with this. And so we can't afford to let machines do our job, because it will just end up with us correcting a whole load of mistakes. We've tried that and it wasn't successful. So, with huge databases ours, the clients are ready to go. They can launch, sign up on a monthly plan and then work it up to an annual plan and get a discount. But yeah, that's normally how it works. Any questions?
Great. There are like 15, 20 questions in the chat already. But I'm going to start with my own and then try to organize these along what I see as a bit of a narrative. So first, I want to ask about your clients and the owners of the vessels. So the biggest thing that you said to me that I had no idea about, and you've completely surprised me out, is that that people are paying you to tell them where their ships are. So to me, it makes sense that a small company or a ship captain or a ill-begotten ship might go out and do things that aren't so clean because that's where the profits are. But I would think that, if you are owning a vessel, you know where it is and you're keeping track of it, because every day that it's not moving product for you, it's losing money. So can you tell us more about that disconnect? I mean, I think there's a level that maybe other people
it
understand,
is
but I don't understand between the master and the charter and the owner.
right. You have one entity which is the owner of the vessel, and then you have another entity which is actually managing operating the vessel, and the data that can be shown by, or that can be viewed by the owner, will say that it's in, for instance, like, in the Gulf of Oman, whereas in reality the vessel is maybe in the Persian Gulf. And so that's the situation we run into quite frequently, in fact. And then what you end up seeing is, like, the paperwork will show that the oil was of Omani origin, or like Malaysian origin, or Iraqi origin, when in fact it is all from Iran, or sometimes it's from Venezuela, if it shows like Malaysian. So this happens all the time. They have their own, PDF templates which they can print and stamp and so on. And then you'll see things that don't make sense. They'll say, like, for instance, that the oil is a specific grade, and then that grade actually is not available from that country. So the nearest match, in fact, is Iran or Venezuela. So that happens more than often.
So one of the elements of the criminality here is the ship's operators are committing fraud against the owners.
Yes.
It's interesting. I didn't quite realize that. Yeah, okay. So now let's take it down a level and take it to the ships themselves.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about spoofing of AIS, and you talked about fraudulent documents. What about LRINT? Are they able to spoof that, or how do they deal with that?
I'm not well versed on what goes on at the LRIT level. I have no insight there, but it is the flag registry which has or should have access to that. What they are seeing on LRIT versus AIS, I have no idea. But I would think that if they are spoofing on AIS, it wouldn't make sense to not do the same with LRIT. So I would expect to, and also I think LRIT is only pinged out once every 6 hours compared to AIS, where it's pinged on a minute-by-minute basis on over VHF versus around 8 to 10 minutes on satellite. So yeah, I can't answer for LRIT. I'm sorry to say.
Oh, well, we already might as well finish here. We already stumped you. It only took 23 minutes.
Exactly.
So going back to companies,
Yeah.
so do you make a judgment call to ever? There are a couple questions here about, like, what makes it a dark fleet, or what makes it a dark tanker. How do you characterize it? Do you have a criteria? Do you label them, or do you just sort of watch everything and let the users decide?
Right. So I've had this conversation with colleagues within the industry, so quote unquote competitors, which I don't really consider competitors, and I don't think at this point they consider us as competitors either, because we always work at some point with each other. I assist them, they assist us, and so on. So we're building a partnership network, you could say, or colleagues at least. And we discussed this, and I think there's one commonality across the board, and that is the OFAC designation. So that's around 150 tankers right there, of the 600 plus. And then for our part, it is, I can't speak for the rest, but for our part, it would be, for instance, the vessels that do engage in clandestine loadings and transfers of oil. And that means when they are switching off or manipulating their AIS in order to load the oil and to transfer it. So what we do is once we have a vessel that has done anything like that, we tag it as a sanctions violator in our database. Now, there are some cases where you have actual security concerns, and the vessels have to, for instance, switch off. They don't spoof, but they switch off their transponders, and we are aware of that based on like their prior history of what they've done and the context of where they're loading and when and why. And so, for instance, we'll see, like, even vessels now which have Russian ownership or Russian affiliation to them, but they're on the Black Sea, and they've suddenly started switching off their transponders for maybe like a week or a couple of weeks at a time. And we understand the context of that, and that would not be, for instance, per se a dark fleet vessel, but a vessel that is actually engaged in or is more concerned about its own security because of the fact that there have been attacks by Ukraine on Russian tankers. So, but nonetheless, we have seen a lot of oil leave Russia in a clandestine manner. For instance, the loadings that happened in the early half of the year in Kozmino, which is a Pacific port, just opposite of Japan. And there, you know, what did we work it up to? I can't remember. It was like 20, 30 million barrels in total. And this is oil that was, you know, it's a light sweet grade, so it's charged at a premium. And it was north of the $60 price cap, which the G7 had enforced on Russia. And so these tankers were loading using Western insurance as well, which they shouldn't have done when you talk about oil that is north of $60. And so what we saw was that these vessels were spoofing. So they were showing that they were in Japan or off the coast of Japan, but just not Russia.
Okay. So, I mean, if I can recap and make sure I got this right, one of our first questions was, do you have a list of dark tankers? And I'm thinking you don't have a list of so-called dark tankers, but inside your database for your customers, you can see people that meet criteria. You have a list of specific criteria,
It's
sanctions
just,
busters.
in our system, it's just 2 clicks. You know, you click on the sanction violator box and you push search, and it produces a list of over 600 tankers. Yeah.
Okay, great. So you talked a lot about verifying the AIS to images.
Yeah.
You have a bunch of freelance photographers out there sitting on ports, people like Charlie Brown hanging out on rooftops of condos, taking shots. Is that how it works? And are you just kind of grabbing up the ship spotter hobbyists?
Yeah, we have a couple of permanent sources which are feeding us daily. So it's and I say 365 daily, not 5 days a week. But we have a lot of information coming in, visual information, and we index all of that. So, and the indexing includes additional context, such as, is the vessel laden with cargo or is it empty? This way, an insurance client, for instance, can do the search themselves and see when did the vessel actually take on the oil, because their criteria might be a little bit different than the criteria of their other colleagues in the industry. For instance, for them, a violation may be, but when the vessel is actually laden with cargo or starts taking on the first drop. Whereas for others, it might be like the vessel just appears in the anchorage. And so we're not going to challenge anything. We're just going to document as much as possible, get them the actual evidence from shore and from space, and they can see everything for themselves in 2 separate galleries. And now with a dark fleet map, they can check where these vessels are and keep track of them that way as well. So our dark fleet map is completely different than from any other map in the industry, because what it does is it's based entirely on visual data. There is no AIS injected into that stream.
And that's shore photographs, and then also you're acquiring commercial visual satellite data. Okay. So kind of in your presentation, you dropped a comment about a recent oil spill, and that got some people interested. What more can you tell us about? Where was it? And like,
it was quite close to.
Is there anything you can talk about in terms of?
No,
that's what it was, and
I could probably put out a tweet after the call. But what we saw was that
okay,
Charlie, I shared it with him as well. What we saw is that there was a spill in the actual transit lane, which was kind of concerning, and it looked heavy and dark instead of you got this nice shimmering reflection of different colors, which you'd normally see with like a lighter fuel. But in this case, it was dark and thick. So it implied possibly crude oil or heavy fuel oil in that regard. So yeah, we do run into these things quite often. I see it a lot, for instance, in the Middle East. You could see it on a daily basis, these spills. Also because of the fact that there are oil platforms, and a lot of the stuff that comes out of the flaring ends up also in the water, believe it or not. So like gas condensate and so on. But yeah, we document everything we can and present, and clients can receive notifications from us by email every single day, and they get to follow up on their vessels or fleets of vessels, for instance.
And when you said the transit lane, is that straight to Singapore?
It would be in the Riau Archipelago from the Singapore Strait, heading northeast.
Okay, so just after the Strait of Singapore,
Yeah.
headed
But
out towards the South China
Pablo,
Sea.
as for the Pablo has been relocated. She's no longer out in the archipelago. I tracked her visually. She was towed away. So she is like near Pengerang, Malaysia, a little bit further out, just at the edge of the Singapore Strait versus the Riau Archipelago.
So who towed her? The Malaysian authorities?
Oh,
Any
good
ideas?
question. Good question. Either Malaysian or Singaporean authorities. Yeah.
Okay.
Have a look.
Well, at least there's some steps going towards cleaning that up.
Yeah, I mean that
gonna-
vessel had no known insurer. The owners were, you couldn't, they were nowhere to be found, and the vessel blew up on the 1st of May, and only in the past week or so has been relocated. So it took a long time, and that shouldn't be the case going forth with anything like this. Yeah.
So do you have any insight into what happens? So, what happens to crew? So I mean, for everybody who didn't track that case, it blew up. Some of the crew members were killed in the explosion, and the
3 of them, yeah.
Malaysian Coast Guard, the MMEA, came out and rescued the others and eventually put the fire out after a major spill. And after, as I already said, some of the crew members died.
Yeah.
So these crew members are brought ashore. Presumably they're not the criminals. Presumably they're working for criminals, or they might even be forced labor in many cases. So, but do we know where they are now? I mean, because even if they are forced labor, they still should be a good source of information on who the criminals are that are running this and owning this ship.
Yeah.
I know that's outside your realm, but I'm just wondering,
Right.
kind of talk it through.
I wouldn't know, but we do get sometimes emails from people, like from parts of Asia, asking us, is it safe to operate on this vessel? Is it involved in dark activity and so on? But the problem is we don't know who we're corresponding with, so we cannot give them any insight, unfortunately. What I would suggest to them is just look at the age of the vessel. As for starters, if it's too old, like if it's in the 20-year range, and if it's and if you're noticing flags that normally wouldn't be used by tankers, but then again, the Panama flag is like, if not the largest representation across the dark fleet at large, for at least Iran and Venezuela, that is the case. There are some things on the checklist, but if you're obviously a novice mariner, you don't have the experience, that is difficult. I mean, I would like to be able to offer some assistance, but there are nonetheless publicly available lists of these tankers. So other entities, I won't mention which, but they have, if you just Google around, you'll find a list of vessels. So you can go about that way. But we ourselves, we get contacted by all kinds of bad actors in the industry all the time, even ones who want to sign up with us with our corporate plan. We've turned down, I think, in the past 18 months, something like $400,000 worth of business, which for a small company like ours is quite a lot of money. But that's because of bad actors who are trying to sign up. And we find out, we know they're bad actors because they own a lot of the vessels that we're actually tracking in the dark fleet.
Han, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Madani, for this very insightful talk. So I have 2 questions. So based on the high volume of demand your business have received, it seems to be like there's a very high demand from institutional clients and private clients to make sure that like these ships are actually be in the place where they are supposed to be. So what do you know what are the reasons behind this? Because of the lack of enforcement or tracking or other tracking option to make sure that these ships are not engaged in illicit trade.
Absolutely.
And the second question is like, other than oil, have you received requests to track ships that engage in transporting like other illicit goods, let's say military technology that is not supposed to be in chance to transfer to like countries under sanctions?
Sure.
Thank you.
Two very good questions. Thank you for asking that,
Yeah.
So for the first question, the demand for our services, yes, it seems like we found our niche, so to say. But we do also generalize in the tracking of oil. I think we track around 2/3 of everything that's shipped out at sea. So there are some markets which we don't track because we simply don't have the staffing to cover everything right now. But we intend at some point to broaden out. Nonetheless, right now we're specializing in what we track, and there's a high demand for it because of the fact that these big institutions, they have obviously the budgets to buy data from other service providers, but the feedback I've received from some of them is that the data is pretty much all the same across the industry. They're all getting it from AIS, and then they're all coming out with their own iterations of the context of what's going on. So, but as long as they have at least two sources, they feel safe to say that, okay, this happened. But then they obviously run into situations where they need to prove something, and they're being contested on that, and that's where we come in. So we offer that additional insight. We produce the report, and it shows stuff which they can actually look up themselves, because we include all the links, for the visual data, for the AIS, for everything, and then they have a stronger story to go with. So yeah, there is a need for companies like ours in this space, and I think we'll continue investing more of our time and resources in this corner of the industry. But the thing is, yeah, we do work with the larger players in the industry as well, the companies that are tracking on AIS, and they do need our help as well. As for the other question, we, like the name implies, we track tankers, tankertrackers.com. So we have looked at things like grain, for instance, out of Ukraine. Those vessels, yes, we can track them, but honestly, for our sake, we want to offer data and insight into things that we are very well versed in. We can quantify things like how many barrels are on board a vessel, depending on what kind of grade of oil it is on board. We even study the shadows in some cases of the vessel, which, the shadow that it casts over the water to calculate its elevation from the sea level in order to figure out just exactly how much cargo is on board this vessel. So not all vessels depart full, not all vessels depart empty. You got this partial stuff and the stuff in between, and that's very important, in fact, and because you'll find out that the vessel was maybe loading at multiple points. So you can't miss any of these points, obviously. So we decided we will just focus now on what we know best, and I think that is actually a good thing for everyone to do. Just stick to your lane in this case, because you got clients that are paying for quality, and we don't want to saturate them with stuff we're not well versed in. Sorry. Yeah.
Cool. Samir, if you don't mind, I'd like to take you back to the Rio Archipelago and the entrance to the Strait of Singapore. So a lot of people on this call are very familiar with the ship-to-ship transfer problem that's going on in that area, which is at the heart of what you're talking about. Is there any way for you to estimate or qualify for the audience how much there is? I'm sure you can't total up the number of gallons, but is there some sort of metric you can use to express how big it is, big of an issue it is?
Oh, let me see. I believe there's around 30 to 40 tankers, the dark fleet vessels that are there. Not all of them are laden with cargo, but a lot of them are. because they would come from places like Venezuela and Iran, and then meet the receiving vessels, which are dispatched from China for the most part. And a VLCC supertanker, which can capacitate 2 million barrels, will show up and meet up with either an equivalent counterparty, another VLCC, or 3 smaller vessels called Aframax. That's the category size, or in some cases 2 Suezmax tankers, which can handle 1 million barrels each. So they're going back and forth, north and south, from China to Riau, versus these vessels. And what they do, what they achieve with that is a shorter round trip. And that means that the vessels, that means that those countries can export more oil as a result of that. So if you have a vessel which has to spend, let's say, 4 or 5 weeks from Iran to northern China, that's going to take you over a month. But if it goes down to Riyadh, that's 2 weeks and a couple of days to do the transfer. And then it goes back. And that's how exports rise as a result from places like Iran. But what really did the job was the fact that Iran's own national fleet, called the NITC, National Iranian Tanker Company, they were, for the most part, used just as storage space for a liquid called gas condensate. So it's the natural gas liquid derived from natural gas, and you can't turn off this tap because this liquid comes up with the gas that is being produced in the world's largest field out in the middle of the Gulf, and it's a field that is shared between Iran and Qatar. And in Qatar, they actually turn that gas into liquid form, and then they export it as something called LNG, liquefied natural gas. So they are one of the world's largest exporters of that, and Iran doesn't have that. So they burn a lot of their gas, they produce electricity for it, but what they do is they export the actual gas condensate. Because they ran out of space on shore to store this stuff very early on in the sanctions, they started packing it on board their super tankers. And they have a fleet of around, I don't know, like 38 or 39 super tankers. And they packed that, for the most of them were packed with gas condensate. And that fleet, it just got stuck in the port of Asaluya, or in the anchorage. And it swelled up to around north of 65 million barrels, just like a few years ago. And it's come down since. It's actually completely disappeared. And they did that by exporting that gas condensate once they figured out, like, oh, we can actually we can hit 2 birds with 1 stone here. We can export to China because it's importing a lot of heavy oil, for instance, and then it needs to blend it down with the help of gas condensate, and we can send it to Venezuela, which is what they did, because Venezuelan oil is so heavy. Like when this stuff spills on the beach, they're actually rolling it like clay. Can you imagine? That's how thick this oil is. And so what they do is gas condensate is injected into the wells itself. It helps to improve the flow. So no longer is it coming out as clay, but it's coming out as mud. And then it is placed on board vessels. And the vessels, they need to have heating coils in each storage compartment so that the oil does not coagulate. It doesn't harden in a 2-month trip to China. And so the gas condensate comes from Iran, is used as a diluent or blending agent in Venezuela, and then is exported as a blended crude oil called Marais 17 or 17 degrees API, and it goes to markets in China, but also goes, oddly enough, under sanction waivers to Europe. We noticed deliveries to Italy and to Spain. And so imagine they're not allowed to import Iranian oil per se, but they are getting it nonetheless with the import of Venezuelan oil. The U.S. also has sanction waivers, Chevron, but they do not import the oil that is diluted with Iranian gas condensate. And instead, they import the oil that is diluted with domestic lighter oils in Venezuela, which is obviously a lower amount than what they can get from Iran. And so now you have a 6 months period, and we're in the first week or two, I think 2 weeks now, where the US has temporarily lifted sanctions on Venezuela, so they're able to export. Hang on. And so now we're starting to see vessels appear, but there's also vessels which are saying that they're going to Venezuela, but oddly enough, they've been there for the past 5 weeks and they've been just spoofing. And so that was the first. I discovered that just a few days ago. And so Venezuela has the means now to export to any market in the world, as I understand it, if I'm not corrected. But will that result in a boost in exports? The White House seems to think that. So they believe that exports might boost by like 100 to 150,000 barrels per day. But 6 months is a very short window for that to happen, because you have an infrastructure, an oil infrastructure in Venezuela, which has been completely gutted during during COVID. There was a lot of smugglers who were ripping out the steel, the pipes and everything, the parts of the refinery, and they were shipping it out by truck to Colombia. So Colombia's infrastructure benefited from that, but also the steel made its export internationally because steel was heavily or in high demand. So the infrastructure has been gutted, and I don't expect that production will rise too much. Might be only like a fraction of what they think will happen, but instead what we'll see is a redirection of exports. So instead of China getting around 60 to 70% of that oil which is being produced today, we will see those barrels being redirected to North America, to Europe, and possibly India as well. India wants to capitalize right now off sanctions because China's been doing it for the past few years. So, for instance, they were a very big, and still are a very big buyer of the price capped oil from Russia, but the price cap itself is only about 40% efficient. So 60% of the oil is being traded above the price cap of $60. Nonetheless, they want that heavy oil from Venezuela because it's great for the production of, for instance, high yields of diesel as well as asphalt. So if you're gonna expand your economy at any time, you're gonna do it with the help of heavy oil, and Venezuelan oil is good for that. So yeah, I think China will lose out on this sanction waiver window as a result, and we might see them actually import more Iranian oil as a result. Iranian oil has heavy to light oil, but all of it is sour, so it has a high concentration of sulfur. None of it is sweet, so it's all above the 0.5 or 0.6 industry standard of sulfur concentration. So yeah, I don't see a big boost coming out of Venezuela. I just see a mix up. It's like a game of musical chairs. Somebody loses out when the music stops playing. And yeah, 6 months is too short for anything like that. Now, the reason why they lifted the sanctions temporarily is because the White House struck a deal with the Maduro government to give them this opportunity, provided that they honor the outcome of the coming national elections, which is held like in the second half of 2024, as I understand it. So last time it wasn't considered as honored, and so the country had, for the brief period, they had 2 presidents, one which was recognized by the West and the other one which was recognized by everyone else. And so I think they're trying to also benefit from the fact that that oil prices are high globally, and there's not much cooperation from OPEC plus, which includes obviously Russia and Iran. And so, and with Saudi Arabia also in the lead, they're not getting the kind of output that the White House is not getting the kind of output it hopes for ahead of the coming re-elections in the US, because the whole agenda there is to keep gas prices low ahead of an election season. And that pretty much actually defines the US foreign policy when you really look at it historically. Yeah.
I think we just got a comment from Martin Marini, who supports this idea of the US policy driving a lot of these issues inadvertently, and kind of not caring about it too much. I did pick up one thing you said. If I caught it properly, you said 60 to 70% of the sanctions busting fuel ends up going to China. I guess the rest is just going to various places, like you mentioned, Italy, that can find a good deal. How much is headed for North Korea?
Oh, well, from Iran and Venezuela, we don't see North Korean barrels or sort of barrels going to North Korea. My understanding for North Korea is that they are mostly importing the refined products, so they can avoid the refining itself, and that would come from refineries throughout the Far East. A lot of it, as I understand it, is from China and Taiwan, and possibly some of the other countries as well. There's a huge annual or semi-annual report published by the United Nations about this. I don't track North Korean imports. I track the exports out of Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and Kazakhstan. My colleagues handle the other countries that we track.
Okay. So someone else at the company is handling those smaller tankers, which are mostly getting underway from China.
Yeah, those are
doing
very
transfers
small.
to the East China Sea.
Yeah, I mean, those are so small that we normally tell clients that we're not comfortable in tracking this size range. We're in the size range that we work with when it comes to high confidence is Panamax on the low end, which is around 400,000 barrels or so, and then ULCC on the high end, which can be 2-3 million barrels. But it's mostly like Aframax, Suezmax, and VLCC class ranges, so 700,000 to 2 million.
And what's when you say confidence? That confidence is based on your ability to positively identify it with visual.
Yeah, visual identification. So what we have is a database that we built, which this morning consisted of 5,605 visually indexed tankers, and our mandate, I would say, what we tell the clients is that the range that we're most proficient at is around 3,400 tankers combined. So we have these additional 2,300 tankers of smaller sizes, and also doing LPG and so on. And our database has a search engine where you can actually look at a tanker and look at the region that it's in, and then you can start inputting all this data into the search query, and it produces a candidate list, a list of candidate vessels. And you'll see like they differ quite a lot, and you'll find your match that way. And then you have to interrogate it with AIS to see, is it spoofing or is it actually there, etc. And the confidence level is very high once you add this vessel into its gallery and you compare it against the previous tags that we have. So every single day we're tagging tankers, and we actually have a feature inside our portal, admin portal, called Tanker Tagger, and that's what we do. We just tag tankers. So we have tens of thousands of tags.
Okay. So there's a few questions about governance, especially the role of flag states, the states where the STS is taking place in their EEZ, and the destination states. All of these seem to have some sort of role in governance, but none of them are doing a very good job.
Right.
Hence, we have the problem. So, I know that you track the tankers, not the policies. But if we can push you a little bit, do you have any comments on how we could close that seam or the source of the problem?
Sure. Obviously, many governments don't want to engage because they're afraid of political reprisals, international incidents, and so on. But the fact of the matter is, those are their waters. Those transfers are happening on an unauthorized manner. So they're therefore illicit in that regard. And because of the fact, it is fact that these vessels, without any assistance, so there's no boom line or anything around them, they will end up spilling oil. And they may even ruin reefs by just dropping anchor where they shouldn't. And that's one reason. And cabling and so on, etc. So yes, that does happen. And if anything, it should be for that reason that they should be pursuing those vessels. Now, I read that there was recently, just a few days ago, there was an arrest of 2 vessels that were engaged in such a manner in Riau. I think it was the Ocean Hermana and the Artemis 3. The Ocean Hermana is an Aframax tanker, so it's around 730,000 barrels, being received from the Artemis 3, which is a VLCC of carrying around 2 million barrels of Iranian oil, according to our database. So the the Ocean Hermana is pinging properly. The AIS position of that vessel is true. You can look it up on satellite imagery. You'll see that the vessel is there. Whereas the Artemis 3 is completely elsewhere on AIS. So she's further west. So she's spoofing. And this arrest happened a few days ago, but the authorities have not really challenged the Artemis 3 crew to stop spoofing. So the vessel should be pinging properly if we're up to me.
So a lot of what you've discussed today, a lot of the questions are focused on the economic motivations of these vessels, and how the sanctions environment enables them or pushes operators to operate in this manner.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking, to some extent, some of the things they're doing, anchoring where they shouldn't, not using booms, is just what anyone would do if they were trying to use an old ship. All of these are just what you would do if you're trying to save money.
Right.
So how much, if we eliminated the sanctions regime and allowed for the free flow of petrochemicals globally, would it really make it a difference? Is it still not up to the flag states, the coastal states, to enforce their own domestic legislation and ISPS, et cetera?
Yeah, they should be enforcing it. Absolutely. It's one thing to monitor it, but it's another thing to enforce it, because if you're only monitoring, then they'll get away with it every single time. And we're talking about several hundred transfers a year. So at least one a day you'll see. And yesterday we had 5 STSs take place in Riyadh, and so that's 10 vessels. We actually identified all 10 of them within a span of just 9 minutes, because that's how our database, is actually well built to do that. But yeah, these STSs will continue happening as long as the authorities do not really do something about it. They don't crack down on it across the board. And to just address one STS and not like several others is also like, well, why are you not addressing the other one? So that's another question for the authorities.
It's always one of my favorite excuses when somebody gets arrested in Indonesia for doing something with their ship they're not supposed to. And they say, but I've been anchoring here for years. But
Yes.
I've been transferring here for years.
Right.
How was I supposed to know?
Right.
Ignorance is.
You don't want another incident where there's an explosion, loss of life as a result, or a destruction of environment. These things, this should be on the priority list for Coast Guards. Absolutely.
Yep. Okay. So I'm going to take us to our last question, which is actually the bottom one in the chat. And that is there a safer way for Russia, Iran, Venezuela to deliver their crude, or actually just deliver their oil to customers in the current circumstances, so long as sanctions and demand remain the same? And then I'll add to that, if the sanctions and demand were different, would they operate any more safely?
We have seen even before sanctions that, for instance, in the case of Iran, that they were shipping oil in a clandestine manner to Syria because there were sanctions on Syria. So they would engage in dark practices even at that point. But yes, obviously, when you have countries in between, like the UAE, which both imports and re-exports oil from Iran, even to this day, it used to occur above table. Now it just happens beneath the table. So yes, there's a lot of crude oil, gas condensate, refined products still going that way. And ultimately, you don't know where the destination is. But if it's on board the vessels that are normally engaged in the dark practice, then you can track that. But if it isn't, then obviously it's a lot more difficult. Yeah. But I don't have a good answer for you, to be honest with you.
Okay. I didn't really expect you to, but I expected your as you took us on a journey towards the answer, we'd be enlightened, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So that's the Maritime Hour, and we're at the 1 hour mark. Is there anything else you want to add? Is there something that you left out or a question that you think got piqued that you weren't able to answer?
I
Give you
guess
the last word.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we cater to institutional clients, but we love to share our insights as to how this whole thing works. I mean, in terms of like the dark fleet and what, where things happen and why and how. So you can follow us on social media for that. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Telegram, and we're on Twitter. Or X is our largest base there. So you can follow us, Tanker Trackers, we're called across all three, and you'll get updates, interesting updates, I hope, from us.
Okay, thanks. I know I learned a lot. As I kind of said at the beginning, this webinar series is focused on getting deep expertise on important issues, especially sort of things that we specialists hear about, but we don't really have a chance to dig into.
Right.
So that's incredible. It's exactly what we hoped for and exactly what we received. Hopefully you got some more followers on X and other platforms. I hope we can stay in touch. Please do let me know if there's anything that YCAPS can do for you personally or for your organization.
Thank you so much.
And I'd like to thank our entire audience for a very engaged chat and being here.